Hey guys, it's JayNite, and today I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for playing Lockwood. Even though Lockwood seems simple, there's a lot you can do with him to optimize your play. So hopefully today I'll be able to show you some stuff you haven't thought about or seen before. So if you see anything interesting, or even if you don't, go ahead and leave a comment at the end of the video and tell me how I'm doing. Alright, let's begin. Before we get to the nitty gritty stuff, let's go over his abilities really quick. He's got Trickshot, which is a bullet that can bounce up to 2 times. Light 'em up, an AoE cone attack. Trapwire, a cross-shaped trap. Backup plan, just a normal dash. And Run and Gun, his ultimate, a dash with AoE along the path. When playing Lockwood, you're going to use his Trickshot a lot. Not just because it's his primary ability that has no cooldown, but also because, depending on where you position, you can almost always hit somebody with it. So learning how to aim those ricochets effectively can add anywhere from 50 to 100 damage or even more per game. Usually shooting somebody in cover reduces your damage by half. However, with Trickshot, if you ricochet the bullet to their side or behind them, you can negate the cover penalty altogether. Because this trick effectively increases your damage by 17, it should be one of the main things you look for when aiming a shot. Each bounce of Trickshot adds 2 range, so if you're shooting at somebody and there's a wall parallel between you and them, you can bounce against it to be able to hit them, even when you normally wouldn't be able to. A very powerful way to take advantage of the increased range per bounce is to hide behind solid objects. You can still hit people by ricocheting your shots, while they probably won't be able to hit you. At least with most of their abilities. Now, there are a pretty good amount of characters with abilities that go through walls, but no character, except for Gremlicians, has such a consistent way of doing it like Lockwood does. Depending on how you angle your shot, you can compensate for dashes and other moves. Here's some examples. Bouncing shots off a rampart shield to hit somebody else. Shooting through both Oz and his afterimage. Aiming so that if your first target dashes, then it hits a second target. And simply covering more spaces than you would otherwise. And finally, a little trick for people using the Extra Tricky mod, which adds 2 damage per bounce. If you're positioned next to a wall, try aiming at it. Depending on the angle, this is very similar to shooting straight forward, but sometimes can turn a 1 bounce shot into a 2 bounce shot for the extra 2 damage. Now, Light 'em Up's a pretty simple ability, so I don't have too much to say about it. Basically just use it when you can hit a lot of people, or use it to cover dashes, or try to find people that are invisible. In the future, I'll probably make a video that's all about aiming and how to optimize it. Trapwire, however, is a pretty versatile ability, and to be able to place it properly, there's a lot of things you have to consider. As a disclaimer, I use the Trapwall mod, so most of the clips I'm showing use it. What Trapwall does is increases the size of the trap from a cross in the middle of a 2x2 square to a cross in the middle of a 4x4 square. This makes Trapwire generally more effective at doing pretty much anything you want to do with it. At the beginning of the game, you probably won't be close enough to be able to hit anybody with Trickshot, so instead throw out Trapwire to be able to hit any frontliners that approach, or even go for the might buff. The key to using Trapwire is situational awareness. For example, block past the health pickups if there are damaged enemies nearby. Or if you're against characters like Pup, Asana, or Titus that dash directly to your teammates, you could throw a trap to where they're going to dash towards. And, probably the most common usage, blocking people's dashes when they're low health. And finally, keep an eye on knockback lines. Knockback lines are the red lines you see when your teammates are going to be displacing the enemies. Throwing down a trap to cover the line is a good way to add a lot of damage, especially if multiple enemies are passing through it. Similar to what I was saying to Light 'em Up, Backup Plan's not that complicated of an ability. Simply a dash that has 6 range. The only special thing about it is, if at the end of the turn you've taken damage, its cooldown reduces by 1. Generally, keep an eye on its cooldown. If it has 6 to 4 more turns of cooldown, try to play defensively and land trick shots at long ranges. If Backup Plan's cooldown is anywhere from 3 turns to off of cooldown, try to get Light 'em Ups and Run and Guns off on your enemy. Because of the way the cooldown reduction works, this should allow you to have your Backup Plan up whenever you need it. And finally, we come to Run and Gun, Lockwood's ultimate. Just like every ultimate, you gotta have 100 energy to use it. One important thing to realize about Run and Gun is it is a dash ability, and dash abilities can't hit other dash abilities. So if an Oz dodges or an L rolls, you can't hit them no matter what, even if they're still within your range after their dodge. One way to get around this is, if your enemies can see that you have your ultimate, they usually will dash. So hold off a turn on using your ultimate, and then once your enemy's dashes are down, then you can use it. Alternatively, if you think you're out of the enemy team's line of sight, then the element of surprise should be enough to hit most of your targets. And a note on ultimates in general. Lockwood can pretty consistently get 2 ultimates per game, but this is only possible if you use your ultimate soon enough to be able to start building up towards your second ultimate. It's usually better to do 2 ultimates per game rather than waiting for the perfect single one. So what mods should you use on Trickshot? Well, personally, I use Extra Tricky, because the extra 2 damage per bounce lets you finish off enemies and deal more damage in general throughout the whole game. But if Impaling Shot's appealing to you, that's also a pretty good choice. If you tend to play more forward and aggressive rather than back trying to hit some pot shots, I'd say it can even be more effective than Extra Tricky. As for the other 2 mods, On the Move and Pinball, I don't think they're very good. On the Move reduces your dodge's cooldown every time you hit somebody with Trickshot, but Backup Plan already reduces its cooldown when you're taking damage, and if you're dashing that much, you really aren't being that effective at dealing damage. And if you are in fact dodging correctly and effectively, then you really shouldn't need the extra cooldown reduction. And for Pinball, I really tried with this one, I just couldn't find really any scenario where it's useful. If you're gonna hit something, you only need 2 bounces. I haven't seen a scenario where a 3rd bounce would help. And even going out of my way to find scenarios like that, I couldn't find any. Okay, so what about Light 'em Up? My favorite mod for Light 'em Up is Phosphorus Rounds. For me, what really puts Phosphorus Rounds over the top is that it only costs a single mod point. Also, the effect of revealing enemies for 2 turns is extremely powerful, especially against stealth lancers like Pup and Nyx. The rest of the mods I'm not so hot for. Spray and Pray's not too bad though, you can cover a lot more area with it. It makes the ability more useful for scanning an area. But both Quick Fingers and Focus Fire kinda confuse me. In my experience, the reduced cooldown on Quick Fingers really isn't that helpful. Even with the base cooldown being at 3, you're not using it every single time it goes off a cooldown, right the turn it goes off cooldown. In a normal game of playing Lockwood, you use Light 'em Up on average about 3 times. And Focus Fire seems kinda weird to me. You do more damage to fewer targets, but doesn't that mean you should just shoot them with Trickshot instead? The advantage of using Light 'em Up instead of Trickshot is that you can hit multiple targets, so why turn your wide AoE ability into a more narrow, slightly more damage ability? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. In my opinion, the only mod that's really worth taking for Trapwire is Trap Wall. Trap Wall makes Trapwire at least 2 times as good. When you're not using Trap Wall, you can block off a corner. When you are using Trap Wall, you can block off an entire pathway. Trap Wall basically makes Trapwire better at what Trapwire does. The only other mod I can see people taking is Instatrap. Instatrap's interesting because you can place a trap predicting where someone's going to move and then shoot them, and that adds up to a lot of burst damage on somebody, but it's unreliable and, well, it's the same cost as Trap Wall, so why not just take Trap Wall? And then we have Throwing Arm and Constellation Prize. Throwing Arm tries to compensate you for bad positioning. Constellation Prize tries to compensate you for putting your trap in a bad place. I don't really see a point in using them unless you're completely new and think you need the help. But really these are what I would call training wheel mods. Don't use them if you don't have to, because they're not worth it. But even then, I think Trap Wall is better for new players anyways. It gives them a better chance to hit things. So I really don't see any merit in taking these last 2. Backup Plan has some pretty decent options mod-wise. Slippery, Kinetic Dash, even Souvenir are all pretty good. The one that I use is Slippery. One increased range doesn't seem like much, but it can really help when getting away from melee characters, and sometimes you need just the little bit of extra distance to get into cover. Kinetic Dash, definitely not as good as Slippery, but if you need another 1 mod point option, this is a pretty good choice. Getting 5 to 6 more energy per dash is a really nice way to get your ultimate up sooner. Souvenir is interesting. The good thing about Souvenir is if the trap that it leaves hits somebody once or twice a game, then it's pretty much paid for itself. Usually it'll hit a frontliner that's chasing you. I don't like it as much as the other ones, but it's not bad. The one that I would say is bad is Tough Customer. I don't know what's up with Tough Customer. It gives you 20 shields until the end of next turn, but this is your dash ability. If you're dashing correctly, you should be able to get out of danger. The only instance and where I can really see this helping you is if there's like a Zuki cluster bomb on you that'll explode next turn, and you need to preemptively dash to prevent the damage. That's such a narrow scenario that you might as well take Slippery just for the extra range. Because if you're dashing right, the extra range from Slippery should protect you more than the shields from Tough Customer. Really, if you're getting a hit after you dash, which you're probably not doing a very good job dashing. So I don't understand why this mod is here. And now Run and Gun. My favorite mod for Run and Gun is Armor Piercing. Since Run and Gun does so much damage, a mod that lets it ignore cover basically adds anywhere from 23 to 46 damage on average. So that's a very powerful ability. And if I could quote Avaki, dealing full damage to 2 targets is better than dealing full damage to 1 target and half damage to 2. Versus speed is also pretty strong with the increased range. You can surprise your opponents with how far away you can use your ultimate from. In the case of Gunslinger, it's not that it's a bad mod, but it's vastly outclassed by Armor Piercing, which has the same mod point cost. And Errant Assault isn't as bad as it could be, but all it really does is lessen the punishment for using Run and Gun at a bad time. So I hope you found this guide helpful overall. If you want to know the exact build that I use Extra Tricky, Phosphorus Rounds, Trap Wall, Slippery, and Armor Piercing. Though if you want to use Impaling Shot instead of Extra Tricky on Trickshot, just go ahead and use Kinetic Dash instead of Slippery on Backup Plan. Have any questions, comments, stuff I left out? Put it in the comments below and I'll try to improve for next time. Alright guys, JayNite out.